So welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a half-year review of the Hasselblad X2D camera, which I now shot for a bit more than half a year. So get my views on how this camera performs on itself, or also compared to the Hasselblad X1D Mark II that I also own and have shot for quite a long time. Over the 6 months where I've owned this Hasselblad X2D camera, I've used it a lot on travels. I've been traveling in Nepal for 2 months, and I've been to Morocco on a short trip, and I've been on vacation in France for almost 4 weeks. So I've used it quite a lot traveling, and it is also as a travel camera I used most. But you've also probably seen many of my reviews of vintage lenses shot on this camera, and that's also the perspective I have on this using this camera. It's not only using Hasselblad lenses, of which I own two, 45mm f4 and 90mm f3.2. A major point about this Hasselblad X2D camera is of course the resolution of it. The 100 megapixels is quite something. Compared to the Hasselblad X1D Mark II with its 50 megapixel, it does improve quite a lot on that. In the beginning I thought that it wouldn't mean anything to me, but it's quite noticeable and I like it very much. When using the camera with adapted lenses, one of the strongest points about it is its eyepiece. 7 stops of eyepiece, that is quite nice. And when you use lenses that don't have image stabilization, which Hasselblad lenses doesn't have either, but on adapted lenses it works as well. So it's a pretty nice feature when you work a lot with the vintage glass and adapted lenses. So I think for me that is maybe one of the strongest sides of this camera actually. When comparing the X2D to my old X1D Mark II, well, not so old, 4 years old, but anyway, there's one thing I'm lacking a lot, and that's the crop modes. I like to shoot the X-Pan crop mode for panoramic images, and the X2D still hasn't got that. I was hoping that it would come in a firmware release, but the firmware releases is coming rather slowly, so I miss that. That's one of the reasons I kept the X1D Mark II, because I like to shoot in the panoramic mode. I hope it does arrive on the X2D, otherwise I'll be keeping my X1D Mark II as well. Traveling with the X2D, that has been amazing. I loved using it on my 2-month stay in Nepal, where I did a lot of different trekking trips and also visited the Chitwan National Park. It gave me so beautiful images, and it was so easy to use, and it's rather compact, and it lies well in the hand, so you can walk around with it in your hand for long times. Anyway, the X1D actually felt even better in my hand, but I know I get a lot of other stuff, among other things the eyepiece that I mentioned I like a lot. So well, you have to take this slightly heavier weight and slightly larger size and just be happy anyway. Another thing I like very much about the X2D is its LCD's ability to flip up. So you can use it low down and not necessarily lie on the ground to get low angle shots. Actually, I don't use autofocus very much, because I shoot a lot with vintage glass, on which I have to use manual focus, except on some of my Canon EF lenses, for which I have an adapter that actually makes it possible to use autofocus in some instances, not with all the lenses. But when using it with the Hasselblad glass, I like to use the autofocus and use it in most cases, but I do most of my focusing manually anyway. But autofocus is quite snappy on the X2D compared to the X1D Mark II. It's definitely not on the level of cameras like Sony's A range, but it's pretty good anyway. The built-in SSD of 1 terabyte in the X2D camera is such a nice feature. I haven't even bought any kind of flash card for it, and I just transfer images directly from the SSD to my computer when I'm finished shooting. And even on my almost 4 weeks in southern France, I only used like 1/10 of the SSD capacity, so it has room for a lot of images, even though they are 100 megapixels and take up a lot of space. But it's nice and it's very snappy. You never notice any kind of speed problem. Quite recently someone asked me why I shot vintage glass on the Hasselblad cameras, because they couldn't fill out the image circle. Some of them actually do, but even then the camera exploits the flaws on these lenses even better than full frame cameras. As an example, I told him that on a Helios 44-2 that has a swirly bouquet and there's a love for it, you don't actually see very much of it if you use a crop sensor camera. And if you use a full frame camera, you see some of it, but it's even better on the Hasselblad cameras. So that's why, but of course this doesn't only go for the X2D, that's the same for the X1D Mark II and the first X1D, because it's the same size of sensor. And it really shows the flaws of these lenses, but that's the reason we use them. It's because we want to exploit these flaws for creative purposes. Another big step up is the increase in resolution of the viewfinder. It's a huge step up for me, and it increases the value of the camera. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I'll bring it up on the screen somewhere here. But it has increased the value of the camera very much for me, and especially when I do manual focusing, which I do very often with, or always, almost with adaptive lenses. It's really a big step up, and it's so nice to have this high resolution screen. To conclude this video, let's have a look at the specs of the two cameras side by side. The bump up in resolution is a big thing. I didn't think from the beginning it would mean anything to me, but I like it a lot, and it's nice to have. I haven't mentioned ISO, but the low ISO is now 64, which in high sunlight gives better opportunities and gives much better image. The viewfinder, well, I mentioned it. It's a big bonus for me that it's gone up to 5.76 million dots. It makes it much easier to shoot with vintage glass and do manual focusing, so huge bonus. The mechanical shutter, that's the shutter in the lenses. Now the new camera X2D supports up to 1/4000th of a second. Maybe that will be upgraded in firmware with the old camera, but the new one supports it directly, and at least one of the new lenses does support 1/4000th of a second. But the electronic shutter has gone down to 1/6000th from 1/10,000th, but actually I don't remember having shot any images with 1/10,000th of a second, so doesn't really mean anything to me. But the Eyepiece, that's a huge bonus. I can shoot flowing water and show blurred water handheld. I don't need to set up a tripod, and when working as a travel leader in Nepal, for instance, not needing to set up the tripod is a huge bonus, because I wouldn't be able to do that. I have to follow my group, but now I can shoot it handheld, and that's very nice. The LCD is a great thing that it can flip out. It's the same size and same resolution as the old one, but it's a very nice LCD, so it's nice to have this flip out, so you can take low angle shots without having to crawl down on the ground. The 1TB SSD is also a huge bonus. I've used the SD cards in the X1D Mark II and never had any problems with it, but it's very easy with the 1TB SSD, and it transfers images quite swiftly when connecting it on USB. There's no video on the X2D. I used it a bit on the X1D Mark II, but it's not a huge thing for me that it doesn't have video. It's mostly a camera for images, so not a big step down. But the crop modes, I really miss the crop modes. Shooting with the crop in the viewfinder, 1:1, for instance, like the old square images from the old Hasselblads, or the expand mode, which I use a lot, is a huge bonus. So I hope that a future firmware upgrade will support this on the X2D. There's no GPS in it. The old one had, but I don't remember having used it any time, so not a big step down for me. The weight is a bit heavier, but regarding ergonomics, it's mostly the step up in size. It's not as good to hold as the X1D Mark II, which I could walk with for a whole day in my hand without noticing. After a couple of hours with the X2D, my hand gets tired, and that's a bit of a downside, but not a huge one anyway. That was my half-year or a little more review of the Hasselblad X2D camera. I hope you liked the review, and now know that I adore this camera and really enjoy to shoot with it, although it has a few shortcomings, at least compared to the old X1D Mark II, but it's a great camera anyway, and I love to shoot with it. If you liked this this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe to my channel so you can get more reviews from my side. Thank you very much for this time, and bye for now.